Okay, so just want to thank Deb for inviting me to this presentation today. I actually just wanted to kind of, in my presentation, really break things down to go down to the really foundational level. And I wasn't going to do this in my presentation, but I just thought I'd ask, how many of you actually know what big data is?
No one on the panel.
Okay. How many of you think you know what it is? Okay. So I'm going to actually give you a definition, and I know I'm going to be shot by some people for doing this, but I thought I'd kind of help folks to really understand what we mean by big data. And again, I might take a little bit more time to do this, but I just felt like, you know, it's probably a good idea to try to ground everybody in the same place. So when we talk about data, we really are focused now on this whole idea of big data, the first thing I just want to let you know is that it's not new. You know, big data has been around for many, many, many years. You know, as Pat talked about, you know, the big data sources have been available to us for quite some time. But big data is kind of a nebulous way of describing what's going on today, and there are three things that are happening. The first is big data can be defined as volume. Either larger data sources, such as the one that Pat talked about, as well as Matthew, or smaller data sources that have high complexity. Right? So you have data sources that have many different variables that you have to consider at the same time. The second is velocity. And this is really, I think, the place where people are really focused in on in terms of data sources, is the fact that we are able to capture this information so quickly. It used to take, you know, even 5 years ago, a very long time to gather data around a range of subjects. Now we can do so in seconds. The third definition of, or the third component of big data is versioning. Which is a word that I like to use, and it gets to the unplatform concept that Matthew spoke about. But it really is many sources of data colliding and then trying to make sense of all that information. So versioning, volume, and velocity are the three things that really define what big data is all about. So hopefully I've explained that very clearly for you. So now, how many people know what big data is? Okay, congratulations. Not everybody got it, but you know, you'll have this presentation available to you afterward. So now that we actually spoke about what big data actually means, let me actually break it down even further. How many of you actually work with data of any size? Raise your hand. Okay. So I was a little bit intimidated, you know, yesterday when I was working on my presentation, because there were a bunch of PhDs in the room, and I'm not a PhD. I have a graduate master's degree, and whenever I present in front of PhDs, and especially folks who know data, I'm very nervous because I know they're going to come up to me afterward and ask me a lot of questions that I may not be able to answer, or I might be able to. But I think, you know, for all of you who work with data, you know, the fundamental thing to really understand about it is that we have to really be able to, just like what Pat did with his data in terms of AIDS view, is to tell stories about it. Storytelling is fundamental to the human condition. You probably tell yourself stories about what happened last night at dinner. You tell yourself stories about what's happening right now. And you tell yourself stories about what's actually happening in the future. So I'm going to talk to you about some data that we've collected related to sexual health that we compiled specifically for this meeting in order to give you a sense of how you can take data and tell a hopefully compelling story about it. But first, let me go back and ask you a question. Why even collect data? Why bother? We spend huge sums of money collecting data every day, and it is my belief that we collect data in order to use it wisely. Data should ultimately be collected, analyzed, and shared to do one of actually two things. It should be shared to change the way people think or change the way they behave. And so we're not just in the business, and a lot of you here are fellow data travelers, of just spewing out data puke. Right? We want to be able to take our information and actually change the way people think, to get someone to fund something, to get someone to take action around, in this case, HIV, AIDS, or STD awareness. So this is easier said than done, right? I mean, I can spew out platitudes all day about how we need to do things with data, but how do you actually do that? So I have some tips, but first I want to put my tips into actual context and show you kind of some data that we've collected that is very relevant to you. So my data story has to do with a fundamental question that we're all asking today about web and social media content, since we're here at YTH Tech, and this is something that we're all focused on. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a presentation and someone says, wow, you know, that thing you did on mobile, that thing you're doing on Facebook was really great, but did it affect people? Did it actually change people's behavior? And you know, 9 times out of 10, the answer is, and this is not against what folks are doing, I don't know. I have no way of knowing whether the stuff that we did on these sites actually made a difference. So let me try to give you a data story that's related to this fundamental question. So why are we asking this question? So as I alluded to, this is the question of the moment. If you're able to link the consumption of web and social media content to behavior change, imagine how much money you would get from the government. So this is a big deal, and as Deb and I were speaking about this particular presentation, we talked about a study that was released last year. I won't go into great detail, but it was raised from the rooftops. If you use Facebook, you can prevent STD transmission. So that's what they did. They linked content consumption on Facebook to STD prevention. So we're actually looking at this from another angle, and I'm very happy today to report to you that social media can have an impact on health behavior, but like any good researcher, it's full of caveats and maybes and perhaps. Okay, so the short answer is yes, social media and web content can have a sometimes limited impact on sexual behavior. I have a longer answer and actually would invite you to download an infographic. You know, Pat, you were talking about an infographic earlier that we specially created just for you guys. So I came with goodies and gifts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our data set later, but I encourage you to download the full infographic at a very easy to remember URL, digihealth.info/YTHlive. This is only available for a limited time. You'll only be able to get it until April 9th, so get it while the getting is good. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this infographic, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we collected this data. My focus is, in terms of the work that I do, is helping health organizations, whether they're public health organizations, pharmaceutical companies, managed care, et cetera, to actually use digital technologies to change health behavior. Isn't that, in fact, that's probably something that you all believe in. And in order to do this, we developed a technology that's specific to content called Enmobius. And basically what we do is we collect the digital breadcrumbs of how people are using social and web media. And what we also do is we automatically ask them questions about how their health perceptions and behaviors are changing based on the content they consume. And so I'm going to show you some data from a study that we launched back in September 2012 called DigiHealth Pulse. And it's with a group of people we call super e-patients. If you know that word, basically e-patients are people who have searched online for health content for themselves or others. And we're collecting a very large data set on these folks across a range of topics, including sexual health. So again, we have a website, and I hate to report this. I know that we're in a meeting around, but I think you all can understand. They're migrating our website right now. So if you go to the site, you might actually hit a dead wall, but I guarantee that by tomorrow it would be back up. So what do we do in this particular part of the study? What we did is that we tracked their online and social media activities, and we simply said, after you read this information, does it encourage you to engage in safer sex practices, right? So similar to what the question was for the Facebook study, right? After reading this information, how will you act? And so what did we actually find? We found some things that were actually interesting, and hopefully you can see this here. This is a part of the infographic that really looks at the types of content that spark safe sex related behavioral intent. And we found a couple of surprising things. One of the things we found is that when people visited porn websites, and there was some conversation around STDs, that sometimes that sparked them to actually say they would engage in safer sex behaviors. When they were looking at, one example is I think we saw, and I might be getting it wrong, Chris Brown and Rihanna, you know, that whole thing. Or there's some stuff going on with gossip websites on various topics. When people were commenting about that stuff and being really snarky, sometimes people actually spoke about STD-related stuff, you know, chlamydia, gonorrhea, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did is that when people went to those sites and they saw that content, they immediately got a question, and the topics we looked at were STDs in general, chlamydia, herpes, and syphilis. And we also are tracking people on their PCs and laptops, and we're working on mobile right now. But the data was very, very interested in terms of what sparked intent to actually engage in safer sex behaviors. But there's bad news to this. which you're probably not surprised by. Even though people say they're going to do something, they don't really do it. So what we found is that about 18% of the people who said yes actually followed through. And what we also do is say, well, how much did the content you consumed online and social media have an impact on your decisions? And we have a little score we created called the Media Impact Score, and that was rated from 1 to 5, and 5 means high, and it was 2.41. So essentially what this tells us is, back to my answer to the question I raised, yes, web and social media content can impact health behavior, but in a very limited fashion. Okay, so why did I just tell that story? Because it will help you to contextualize how we go from this, at the top is just a little bit of our data set, to this graphic, to this infographic. And so if you're working with data, here are 6 tips that I'd like to present to you to actually help you tell better data stories. Tip number 1 is have a goal. My goals were to answer a burning question that many of you have, help folks who aren't able to answer that question about whether or not their content actually made a difference, to provide you with some ammunition to do that, help you put web and social media into appropriate context, and support your work and research in sexual health. So I'm hopeful that in this presentation I was able to shape your thinking about health and social web media, and also maybe prompt you to act in ways that are a little bit different. The second tip, especially with large and complex data sources, you can't go into these analyses with these large data sources with a preconceived hypothesis of how the world is going to work. So you really have to be open-minded. Know that you're going to be surprised. Don't be afraid to explore. Stay open to patterns that may emerge, because we're constantly surprised by what our data tells us. I mean, who could have imagined that people would have been having these STD-related conversations when they're talking about Rihanna and Chris Brown? We just had no idea. So be open-minded. The third tip, and this is especially important with very large data sources, is focus on the one data point that matters the most to you. If you're not doing that, you're really going to be led down the wrong path if you're not focused. So for us, our goal is to quantify the impact of web and social media content on health perceptions and behaviors. That's the motivating force for how we look at all of our data. Tip number 4 is visualize your data, and Pat mentioned this a little earlier. But you don't have to go through a whole fancy infographic like what I presented or visualization tools. Just take out a pen and paper and write down what are the major things you're trying to communicate with your data. Have a couple of bar charts or pie charts or whatever it's going to be, so that you're going to be able to explain the data story you're trying to tell to yourself, and it'll be much simpler for other people. So we use pictures to explain our data to ourselves and also to you. Tip number 5 is a more high-level tip. Big data is the civil rights issue of our day, and I'm not just saying that because I feel very strongly about the use of responsibly using big data, but you can do a lot of things with data sets that are very intrusive to people's privacy as well as damaging to their health status. So if you're working with these complex data sources, really handle with care and be responsible. And the big question we get about our data is, how do you protect people's privacy? And we have a multi-step process to do that. So that's how we're ethical around our data sources as it relates to reporting out on this kind of data. And the final tip, and I think this is a tip for everything, never stop learning. We're collecting more and more data faster, and you're going to find that today you believe something, but tomorrow you believe something else. And so the data I presented today could change tomorrow based on who we look at, what they think today, what they think tomorrow. And so when you're working with these big data sets that have velocity, have versioning and volume, you really have to be open to the fact that you're going to continue to learn. And so that's great for people who love data, because we like to learn. So if you'd like to connect with me, you can via email. We have a web form on our website, which is hopefully will be up very soon at enspektos.com/contact. I also know there's a lot of people in this room who may be intrigued by the work that we're doing, so I'm actually going to give you my schedule, my online schedule. And if you'd like to schedule a meeting with me, go to the digihealth.info/fjchat, and I'd be happy to speak with any and all. So with that, we'll get to the conversation, and we'll focus on your questions about big data. So thank you very much.